Thank you very much for inviting me here and inviting the open source industry. My name is Emil Brok. I'm Global Sovereignty Investor at SUSE, and besides that I also try to represent the complete open source industry through an organization called APPEL. That's the Open Source Business Alliance for open source companies. And I have a great honor to be in this panel today together with Sebastian Reibel. He is the Director of EU Government Affairs at APPEL, the organization I'm a board member of. He will come up soon there. And I would love to invite James Lovegrove, my colleague in lobbying for open source, here with me on stage. You look surprised.
This is Cyprus, right? Wait one step.
James is, yes please, take a seat. James is Red Hat Public Policy Director. He leveraged for, it says 25 years, but actually it's for 1,000,000 years. He is leveraging open source policy experience at the intersection of open source, AI, cybersecurity, and obviously digital sovereignty. His role is to defend open in multiple geos around the world and to help open source communities understand and anticipate in evolving regulations, how they impact the open innovation ecosystem. Wow, thank you very much for being in this panel with me. And second, I'd like to invite to the stage is Iraklis Varlamis. He is member of the board of GFOS. Iraklis, please come, because Iraklis is professor of data management here at the Hari Kopio University of Athens. And he is also collaborating with GRNet under the Ministry of Digital Governments for developing solutions in the public administration. His work connects academics, research, and public sector digital transformation, open source infrastructure, and practical experience in EU-funded projects. Also, open educational technologies, such as the open educational robot Vospot, is one of the examples. I'd love to hear more about that. Thank you very much for being on the stage with me. Third, I have the honor to invite Zita. Zita is also known as Georgia Kapisaki. She is Associate Professor of the University of Cyprus and Board Member of Open Source Technologies Alliance, in other words, GFOS. Thank you very much for being here, it's great. And finally, on this panel, I love to invite Paula Grikoziuska. Paula Grikoziuska is Senior Manager Strategic Partnerships at the Linux Foundation. She has been for the past 8 years worked on open source policy in Brussels. Wherever you go in Brussels, you meet Paula. And she's working on the open source policy in Brussels in a variety of policy and research projects. She focuses on enabling collaboration for Europe to leverage the global commons stewarded by the Linux Foundation. Wow, okay, that's quite an impressive panel. Thank you all very much for joining me here on stage. I was very impressed by the keynotes we heard earlier. I would like to take this panel discussion in, I want to chop it in 4 chapters. So the first chapter is the problem. Is there actually a problem? We will discuss about that, but we heard already the bits of that in the keynotes. Second, we will talk about the tools, the possibilities. What can we do about it? What are the limits? Thirdly, we will look at how we can make it work. And as a 4th chapter, we will talk about the package that was talked about earlier by Thibaut Klein. So I'll open the first chapter, the problem. Because the problem is that 70% of the European cloud market is being controlled by non-European companies. And these EU's own providers, we only had 29% market share, but that was back in 2017. Nowadays, it's declined to half of it. We only have 15% of the current European cloud market with European companies. And the numbers go even worse, because we are giving a enormous amount of 264 billion euros every year to non-EU proprietary companies. Imagine that we can use only a smart bit of this money for ourselves. So what I would like to know, and I don't see my colleague of Appel yet there, but I would like to know if we see this problem that is set here as a structural problem, or is it a natural sequence because they invested in it? So if they invested in it, why not then also reap from it? Who would like to go on this one first? James, I see you looking at it. Feel free to jump into it.
So I was just reflecting on this eye-watering amount of money, 264 billion euros. And of course, the recent award for Cloud 3 was 180 million, not billion, 180 million over 6 years. So it's a good start,
For sure.
but it's a long way to go. And I'd say that the companies that have won are fantastic companies, European companies. They all use open source. Some more than others, and some contribute more than others.
Correct.
All of them, without exception, are working with Red Hat, which is a US parented company. But I think the point is they see the fact that in order to get the best possible technology, they have to reach out to this global community. And not so long ago, there was a report from Frank Nagel, who's talking about the value of that open source governance is at 8.8 trillion. So if you were to reinvent all those billions of lines of code, that's what it would cost. So here I think there's a great opportunity to kind of have one's cake and eat it, empower, provide these European companies with fantastic technology, open source technology, and that pie that we're talking about, the 264 billion, that is growing as well, but there's absolutely an opportunity to kind of increase the slice of that pie, which can go to the open source community, can go to open source companies, and then I think you get the best of both worlds. You get better features, better bug fixes, more resilient technology, and you get more sovereignty.
Cool, thank you very much for that. And I'm curious, Paula, if I may reach out to you, because you represent the Linux Foundation Europe. What does the Linux Foundation Europe bring into this discussion?
So, the problem of dependency is a problem for European companies, for European institutions, all of that. But from a perspective of an open source foundation, the problem lies within the ecosystem. Or I would say the solution lies within the ecosystem. We have amazing developers in Europe, we have amazing projects, and also some of the largest projects globally on open source have a vast majority or a vast part of European developers, such as CNCF has 40% of European contributions. And this is something that makes modern software run. And I think we need to connect this ecosystem that exists in Europe, that exists globally, and then connect it with all of the more commercial side of things. So, I feel like for foundations, like the problem is very multifaceted. I feel like for companies that, it's a bit easier to say that, okay, this is the number, we need to increase the number of European companies that actually get the slice of the pie. And I really hope to see that, and I think that the strategy and CADA are going to help us with that. Hello.
Let's do some background troubleshooting. Sorry.
But what I would also like to say, probably we'll talk about it more later, but recently we published another report on the return on investment, an investment in open source, and that's 2 to 5 timefold that you put into open source as a company, as an organization, that you can get back from it. And this is something that we already saw in the study that I was a part of, the value of open source that was published in 2021 for the European Commission. And that was quite a breakthrough because for the first time we saw that, okay, this is not just a nice idea, this is not just for increasing our independence, this is not just an ethical choice. No, it's also something that just makes sense for companies. And of course for governments, because in the end we count our money and we want to spend public money in the right way. So I really hope that we will see the effects of that, and we'll have a lot of work in the next months and years.
Excellent, thank you very much for that. I'm curious, Sebastian, hello, can you hear us?
We need to turn off the microphones.
Oh. Hello, Sebastian. Can you hear us?
Let's see, I believe he can't.
Hello, Sebastian.
Sorry, we have a...
No worries, no worries. I'll first go then to the University Haricopio of Athens. How do you think that universities, the educational branch, is able to help in this situation?
Okay, yeah, thank you for the explanation. I think that this is a nice opportunity for Europe and for European universities to work with open source actually in this period. If we were talking about this subject 10 years ago, maybe the situation would be much different. As Tibor said, now most of the big companies invest on open source. Most of the big projects are running on open source, and this is something that is very interesting. What is necessary from the academic community is to be able to develop, let's say, the capacity to the students, to their students and the future workers to use open source, to develop open source, contribute to open source projects, so build the capacity, also build the mentality to work with open source. This is something that we are still working on, and we are still trying to improve in this domain.
Cool. Thank you very much for that. Yeah, that's great. And then I'm curious, Sita, can you tell us how GFOS, so we're moving from Europe now to a specific region here. What does the GFOS Organizations Alliance do in this matter?
No, if I'm going to speak about the Greek version, let's say the Greek chapter, the Greek free and open source software company, there are many things that are being done. I think that Iraklis covered many things that go on in the universities, but from that respect, it's mainly attributed in the Greek perspective and in the Greek context. And in that context, it tries to do many things, mainly to communicate to the government, to the Greek government mainly, and all the various institutions, how we can foster open source in all the activities, also in universities, but not only, mainly in governmental structures. And it's true that there have been many attempts over the years to contact also the ministries, various other instruments within the government in order to promote more open source. So it's mainly about changing what I think in a large area, mainly the mentality also that Iraklis said, but also not for students, which I think it's maybe sometimes easier to do, but to change it in the government. And yes, I think some countries are maybe more open, some might be less, but this is what it's trying to do in Greece, and mainly let's say also the CY force, the similar company in Cyprus is also towards leading towards that respect. So maybe this is an opportunity also at national level to do more things, yes.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Let's see if we can, Sebastian Reigel. Sebastian, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you, but I'm afraid I missed whatever was said before. I'm very sorry.
No problem, no problem. If you can hear me, I'm curious, the open source industry that you represent through the organization of Appel, what do they do about the problem? And the problem that was was set out was that we as Europe, we give 264 billion euro every year to non-EU property companies. What is the open source industry in Europe doing?
So I hope I'm not repeating any points that were already made, but yes. So I think the Commission has really outlined it really well in the technological sovereignty communication that they've just published, in that we are at a strategic, decisive point where these dependencies that we've accumulated over decades are getting overwhelming and are creating systemic vulnerabilities that we really need to start changing something about. And the open source industry, and of course you represent a big part of it, the panel does, is here to provide really solutions that can replace or contribute to the services and the products that are needed to make a change in these dependencies and to finally reduce them and improve the technological sovereignty of Europe.
Yeah, thank you. No, that's great. That's a new perception on it. I'm curious because we now just talked about chapter 1, the problem. If we look at the tool, you hear everywhere open source, but I also hear open standards quite often. Who of the panel would like to explain why open source software and open standards are vital in this journey towards more autonomy?
Maybe I could start.
Yes, Paula, please.
Listening to everyone before now, I was thinking that open source can contribute to sovereignty through actually lack of control.
Excuse me, so if you turn on your microphone, I think Sebastian might be able to hear.
Should I hold it or?
Sebastian, can you hear the panelists?
I can hear you well, Emir, but Paula, if you would speak up, that would be great.
Yeah, I think now you can hear me better with the microphone. Yeah, okay. So open source provides sovereignty through lack of control. What I mean by that is lack of control by one single party, because this is the problem. And in actual open source, you know, like technical leadership, technical direction is decoupled from the financing, from the decisions that, you know, like are about the very existence of a project. And while, you know, I think it's great to have mechanisms such as the European Sovereign Tech Fund, it's great to push for those investments. We also do need to increase capacity, so to use those tools that are not really owned by anyone. I hope I am clear. I wanted to start the conversation on, you know, the capacity and the lack of control by one single party. And I think this is what we should strive for, and also not necessarily for, you know, a European version of anything, but European capacity. And I really like the point that was made on the universities. And that skills have made their way to the open source strategy. We also had a recent report on tech talent. We see that in Europe there is a lack of 48% of organizations say that they are understaffed for cybersecurity experts. 48.
Okay.
So we have a long-term problem that we need to solve. And skills are about, you know, the ability to use whatever tool and create new tools, and not just for using the tools that already exist and that someone else has created.
Thank you. And then I'm curious, let's move to the universities. We hear about a knowledge gap. Iraklis, can you give us an insight of specifically what the Harikopio University of Athens is doing to get, well, basically work on this challenge, so get more people out of the university knowing about open source and security?
About open source and security. Okay, security is not our best, let's say, best skill for our students. We are most focusing on AI and software engineering, but of course security is part of software engineering, so it's something that we're also considering. What we're trying to give to our students is, let's say, the practical experience to issues, to dangers that they may be exposed to when they develop the software. So this is something that we're trying to give to them. Actually, before going to this, I would like to tell something about the standards that you said before.
Open standards.
The open standard that you talked before. What comes into my mind when we talk about open standards, when we talk about standards in general, is the requirement for interoperable systems and interoperability. So this also comes to the need for not having a monopoly, but having multiple players that can work together, can cooperate and collaborate. So the need for open standards is important for open source sustainability, let's say, because in that case we can have multiple players that contribute to open source software, multiple projects that collaborate, can be replaced easily with new solutions and so on. So it is necessary for these two to go together. And this also raises something that is very important in my mind, that is the maintenance of open source. And open standards are also contributing to that direction. So when you have follow specific standards for developing the software, then it is easier for your company or for another company, for another competitor or another expert in the field to take this technology and move it one step forward. So this is also very important. And this is a factor that will also help open source software.
Yeah, thank you. Sita, I'm curious, because in the keynote from Thibaut Kleiner, Thibaut was talking about the gaps that are here, that we're dealing with regarding the open source industry at this moment. Can you say something from your perspective? Which gaps do you see, and do you have an idea how we can solve them?
In the industry, you mean software industry mainly? Yes, we have to say that I think that in many cases, many people in the industry are very skeptical about adopting open source software. But I have to, yes, I do not remember the statistics correctly, but I have to say something about a report by Black Hat. It's a company that is doing a lot of risk analysis and also working a lot on open source compliance. Yeah. And it's very impressive is that they found that compared to last year, in the report of 2026, I think it was more than double the number of open source components that companies used. I mean, so this, okay, of course, AI has changed that a lot. So I'm not sure if this is true that maybe some industries are not so open to that anymore, because at least based on this, which was based on data coming from 3,000 code bases that they audited, it's maybe, yes, AI is to blame, but it's true that now in the code bases of companies, many open source components can be found. So maybe this is something that is changing, I think. And of course, I guess companies always think about what happens, about how they can profit. So, but as mentioned before, in the keynote of Mr. Kleiner, it was mentioned that yes, there are other ways to do that. You can offer support, you can offer components that are not, that have a different licensing scheme. Yep. So there are things to do. So I don't know if, I think this is changing now. Yeah. And may just also add something to the previous also discussion about the open things that can make open source also more important, more useful. Is that what we didn't mention is that when something is open, we can also test compliance, legal compliance, regulatory compliance, which is something that can be adapted also in different countries, but also very important for EU. If something is belonging to another jurisdiction, legal-wise, then if you cannot really also examine that it is legally compliant with all the regulations, the Cyber Resilience Act was mentioned, or other regulations, traditional ones like GDPR. So I think this is something also a very important point as well that would make the case for open source more important.
Okay, well, thank you very much. We talked about chapter 1, the problem. Then we talked about the tools, open source. So if open source is a valuable instrument, how can we use it in procurement? And Sebastian, can you hear me?
No, we can't.
No, you can't?
No.
Okay, then I move to James. James, what do you think that within the area of procurement can be done so that open source and open standards have a better chance, or maybe even a privilege, open source first?
Yes, thank you very much. Again, Thibaut's keynote is giving us the lens, the framework. So somewhat spontaneous thinking about the reference to the annex in terms of identifying areas which need some serious investment, and then also those that don't. So in terms of the world of open source, there are 10 million projects out there. And there are over 100 million developers contributing around the world. And a good chunk of them are here in Europe. But I'd say that chunk is 20, 23, 24%. So we find that in large part, it's almost impossible to distinguish one from the other in terms of projects that then drop down and which then are available to European companies to contribute to, but also to use. So I think there's clearly this is the starting point, but I think there's a lot of discussion needed to understand better how not to throw the baby out with the water.
Mm-hmm.
I think one such area which probably needs doubling down on, as you say, is this open source first piece.
Yeah.
And this idea you also mentioned about capacity and the skills that we have.
Mm-hmm.
So there is this reference to capacity to fork. So forking global projects into European. Apart from the fact that some of them will be difficult to do from a legal perspective because they have copyleft licensing. That means they're by definition, if you were to geolocate, you would infringe that. But the other is the point we made earlier around these billions of lines of code you can access and use right now. You just need a brain and a computer. So forking, I think the idea should be possibly looking more at the capacity to contribute as opposed to the capacity to fork. Because the more you contribute, actually by definition, the more in control you are. And also in terms of even if you're not going to use this as your business model, you're going to be smarter for it. You will be avoiding some of the issues you saw in Log4j where there was nothing really wrong with Log4j, it was just the fact that people were taking this for granted, chucking it into their system, and not doing the due diligence which was necessary. The final point on funding. Yes, procurement is a very effective tool to pull through technology. And funding is also a vital tool to make sure that we pick up some of the areas which have been talked about, right? On the fringes. Things which, the proverbial guy in Nebraska, right? So, we looked at the sort of aftermath of the mythos, and we have, Daniel Stenberg from Curl working day and night. I'd say he's a pretty good recipient of some funding and some help. You've got Moodle out there, you've got Drupal, you've got lots of these really great initiatives, projects, which need some funding. So I think they would be immediately prioritized. But there are others which perhaps don't. But the funding and procurement, they do work hand in hand. And it's not one without the other.
No, absolutely. Okay, well, thank you very much for that. I would like to move to the fourth chapter. That's the package. And the package is the EU's technological sovereignty package. It frames open source as a security and resilience priority. But is there an equally serious economic case here? That's the question. Public sector, ICT, spending in the EU is around 125 billion a year. If a meaningful share of this shifts towards open, reusable open source solutions, what would be the economic picture in a couple of years from now? So the long story short, how can the package that was just released and mentioned by Thibaut Klein, how can it help to this? Sebastian, did you get the question? And can you respond to this?
Sebastian can hear us.
No, I don't think he can hear us. No?
I'm not figuring it out.
Okay.
I think we have to bring our own technology next time.
We'll bring our own technology, okay. Then I would like, Paula, do you have feedback on the package that was released a couple of weeks ago? How can it help?
I have a lot of feedback on the package. We shared it with the Commission many times in many various ways. And also quite collectively, which I think is very unusual. In Brussels, lobbyists usually don't exchange notes that much. And I think that shows also the collaborative spirit of open source, that we are all together trying to have a joint feedback. But as you said, procurement is a big driver of public spending, of also culture of what is being done. So I actually used to work on gathering data on public procurement within European member states. And whenever I talk to ministries in the member states and I ask them hey, do you consider open source in your procurement? And it's specific, even more for research and development projects, because that's more culturally usual for those projects. And they were often a bit clueless. They just didn't know how to do it within the framework that they were given, within the templates that they were given. They have to do procurement of, we always say that, they have to do procurement of pencils and chairs and anything that you can imagine, and then someone talks to them about open source software. And we're like, what do you mean? So I think now it's a big change, big chance to not only change those templates, those frameworks. In the impact assessment, I really like that for CAD that there was this part on actually assessing how much money we need to change those procedures within the member states. But I think what is needed the most, and this was the result of many projects that I have done on this topic, is that we need to change the culture. It's, I find it a bit of a disappointing finding because, that's so vague and broad. And culture is very difficult to change.
Yeah.
But we have seen an extreme acceleration of the culture change. A couple of years ago, I was only able to talk about these topics with a couple of member states and their ministries like France, like Germany, like the Netherlands. They have always been interested in this topic. They have quite some capacity on that. And then other member states, such as Poland, where I am from and where the previous presidency was, it was sometimes difficult to even find someone to talk about it. And now we all talk about it. This is unbelievable how fast it has changed. So I hope for a big culture change also related to these policy developments. And I think that's a very important step.
An elaborating question on culture. Culture is so big, so who, where, which people, whose culture would you like to start changing?
So what I have seen many times is we call them open source champions within governments, within public administrations. It's one person that is active in some association that actually believes that this is a good idea, and they often have done the very tiresome work of convincing their own unit, their own colleagues, and then it goes up. But now we also see the pulse from like the higher level, and I know that member states were waiting for this impulse from the European Commission, from the European Parliament, that hey, this is a good idea. So again, I think it's very much multifold. Also, developers, developers love open source, and open source is a talent retention strategy for many companies. And it wouldn't, developers are often people who, they often straightforwardly, believe in what they believe. And I think that's a great strategy, and that shows. James, would you like to build on that?
I can try. So I think, yes, I mean, again, just to make this point about the open source first, one of the upsides of sometimes seeing some leaked documents is you see that there's a differential between what was in and what was kept out. And often the folks who've got the pen are as frustrated as the open source folks, because it is very difficult to make the case for open source. The fear and uncertainty and doubt comes back like this. Even though we're decades on, we can all the stats prove it is a safer way of developing and deploying software. Almost no amount of studies that seems to win that argument. Nonetheless. But this discussion about mandating the evaluation, we're not saying you've got to buy open source, and that would be wonderful, but that would not be right either. It is to make sure that the public sector have this sense of control, that they can weigh up one against the other. Now, if there's a mandatory evaluation of open source, the issue that we've seen over the last few years is there's always this unless security, unless interoperability, unless something. There are plenty of tricks that could be used to kind of hold on to the status quo. So I think this point you're making about putting the feet closer to the fire, but without making them feel that that's absolutely the only choice they have. I think that's very important. The other point is, of course, just go back to this idea of having one's cake and eating it. If we, for example, do end up with forking global communities back into the EU-27, what happens is you have this tech debt, and you also have this burden of security. And that is something which requires huge amounts of money. So I'll give you an example. So we've just committed, even though we welcome regulation, we welcome funding, we have committed $5 billion to go out and look at 150,000 projects many of which aren't curated by Red Hat. We're looking at security vulnerabilities. Why? Because many of our European customers are pretty unhappy about the world post-Mythos. They can't wait for the right regulation or the right funding, whatever. It has to happen now. So I think that epiphany is something which again probably needs to be baked into this approach that yes, regulatory activity is absolutely essential, yes, funding is also, but there's also an onus on the private sector to also step it up and protect those kinds of infrastructures, make the investments, and then as on this investment, all of those commitments are going to be in typical kind of Red Hat way, like SUSE, upstream first, shared upstream. So everyone will benefit from that kind of investment. So I think that's a particular example of what is happening more and more, and how we don't want to kind of again end up on the wrong side of where this potential trajectory from a regulatory perspective is going.
Yeah. Thanks. Thank you very much, James. I would like to dive in one of the elements that was mentioned by Paula, these champions. Zita, do you have an idea what can we do here in this room to start helping champions tomorrow or even today?
I can maybe talk more about again the perspective from the universities, because in order to cultivate, to create those champions, you have to get them early. When they are young, and I think that the universities can help a lot in this, like I also mentioned before. I can talk that the universities, we have to cultivate this culture very early, also in all the courses, but not only when it comes to tech students that can understand more things, but also to anyone who could be also a consumer of open source software, right? Anyone. And I don't know, for anyone else, it would make more sense to be an open source applications users yourself, right? If you become one, you can persuade others to do that as well, and then you can also help in making those people that will talk about this again in one organization and will make a bigger change in that respect. So we can start small and then
start small.
Yeah.
Okay. And James, I'm curious, and we're going to closing here because now we are the president of the United States of Europe, and you have the ability to change one thing tomorrow. What is it what you would change? You picture yourself there?
Be prepared to be amazed. My mother always says I'm a bit of a scratch record, so I think I will keep scratching that record. This is thinking about the report that Paula mentioned, way back when. The data was quite compelling. It was very compelling. It was saying the contribution that open source plays in terms of the EU-27 is somewhere between 65 and 90 billion euros contribution. Then there was another factoid in all of this, which I thought was brilliant. It was, if you increase your contribution by 10% into this global commons, you have an uptick in the GDP of 0.4 to 0.6.
Wow.
So if this package goes in the right direction, what will happen is there won't be a 10% increase, there'll be a 20% increase. At the moment, Europe's growth is just over 1%. That means open source can double the growth rate in Europe. I think that's something which we really need to focus on and keep hammering home. I think that's such an important message. Thanks.
Sebastian, can you hear us? And we can hear you as well. I made you President of the United States of Europe. What is the one thing you will do to help open source grow further?
I think I said this at the Open Source Policy Summit in January in Brussels already. If we are spending money on IT projects today, then we need to take that same amount of money that the public hand spends on ICT these days and spend it on open source in the future, because only then can we create the user experience that people are awaiting from us. Only then can we actually make up for the promises and double down on the technological sovereignty support that we can give.
Thank you very much. That's great. Paula. I made you President of the United States of Europe. What is it what you're going to do tomorrow?
So I really agree with many points that were already made, and
Yeah.
I've realized something that we didn't mention is the European OSPA network.
Oh,
So open source program offices within
Good
member
one.
states. This is something that I would definitely reinforce. I would provide good funding, great people, bright people who can steer it. From
maybe
the
explain a little bit. I don't know if anyone understands here what an OSPO is and what it does.
Yeah, so briefly, Open Source Program Office is a unit, an entity within a larger organization, and it's very popular in the private sector to manage all the needs related to open source. And it can mean anything from technical development and collaboration with open source projects and communities, but it can also mean a bit more of a strategic role of driving and collaborating with other such offices and other organizations. So we have quite some open source program offices within EU member states, and it's often at the ministry level, but it's also often on the local level. And for a couple of years, there has been facilitated by the European Commission collaboration between those offices. And now with the open source strategy and with the Cloud and AI Development Act, this strategy is going to be, this collaboration is going to be reinforced. And I think it's very crucial to have a good partner from the public sector to work on this. They can think about procurement, about collaboration with the private sector, with the foundations, with people like us. So yeah, that's the point that we forgot to mention during this.
Very good, very good. And actually the third panel today is on the specific topic of OSPOs. We will talk about an OSPO for Cyprus. So feel free, and he's been invited all to stay and at least until the third panel. Iraklis, you now are President of the United States of Europe. How are you going to help the open source?
Thank you for the honor. And,
Yes, you're welcome. I just made
I'll try to think creatively. So what I was thinking when we were discussing is that as the months pass through, the code becomes less and less expensive because we have AI tools that generate code and generate highly structured code, high quality code. So probably in a few years from now, it would be much easier to reproduce something that is closed code to be open code. So if I could be able to fund something, I would put most of my money, let's say, to building the capacity in the countries to have this sovereignty, so to have the capacity to develop their own solutions, their unique solutions, and also make them open source so that they can be sustainable and they can be maintainable and they can be secure. This is something that we have to build, not only to deliver a pilot or to deliver a working software, but also to make sure that when we need to expand, to upgrade the software, we'll have the capacity to do it, to maintain it. So this is something really important.
All right, well, thank you very much, and thank you all very much. Sebastian, Iraklis, Paula, James, and Zita, thank you all very much for your contribution, and thank you all for your attention.